1989 John Deere 285 or 345, 725, a bunch of Kubotas, some Craftsman, any other tractor with one of these Kawasaki V-twin engines with the leaky fuel pump. Check the pinned comment for the timestamps. Diagnostics and info on the fire danger is next. The repair starts at about the 220 mark. Parts info about getting a better price on the new pump is discussed around the 1210 mark. Destructive disassembly of the old pump is shown at about the 2420 mark. Diagnostics in my case was pretty simple. Fuel is pouring out of this weep hole. This is the dry side of the diaphragm, so when the diaphragm it leaks in any way, fuel will come down here. So this is an intentional inspection hole. On the newer pumps, I'll get into this a little bit later, they have a diversion because there were some fires that were being caused by this design, unfortunately. So it's rather an important repair, but I'll go ahead and start the engine now and I'll let you see how much fuel was coming out of here. So as you can see, that is a big deal. So obviously this is a serious issue because fuel leaks cause fires. This issue has been well reported on the boards and the forums for several years now, but I was not aware of it until I started researching for the replacement pump, and that's when I learned about all this fire danger. It's a serious problem because the position of this weep hole allows fuel to possibly end up on very hot parts, especially the muffler and the exhaust pipes. Unfortunately, that has been the cause of many fires in several different makes and models equipped with these Kawasaki V-twins that have this style of fuel pump. It's a serious enough issue that Kawasaki redesigned the pump to add a diversion nozzle and a hose. So if you have a model with this fuel pump, you might want to take the hood off and the heat shield and have a look to see if your fuel pump has been replaced with the updated design. If your engine still has the older design, then you might want to replace it proactively just to mitigate for the fire risk. So that is the reason why this pump is getting replaced. There are other reasons why you may need to replace your fuel pump if you have some type of internal fault that's not allowing proper fuel pressure, for example, to build up to the carburetor. So let's get started. First thing we'll do, just to be safe, is go ahead and disconnect the battery. We'll disconnect this negative terminal, the black one on the battery, and that's a 1/2 inch. I'll pull this up and I'm going to cap it. Okay, just going to put a little cap on there just to be sure. Next, over on the other side here, we need to disconnect this one electrical right here for the headlights. To disconnect this, there's a tab on the top. You can just kind of pull that up and pull it back like that. This hood can be a little bit annoying to remove, but I'll show you the way that I have found is probably the best way. There's a couple ways to do it, but I'll show you the way I try to use. Get in here, we're going to pull these outer keys right out, and there's a bushing here that we're going to have to push this way. You can either do it from inside or from outside, and I have found it's easier to do it from the outside. So I pull these keys here, and then I come back and just go ahead and close the hood. Then we're going to come around the front here and use a screwdriver to push these bushings out. So there's the hole there where we pulled the counter key out, and this bushing just needs to move back that way. So you might have to just kind of slightly lift up the hood from below, and then you just want to push this bushing out so it's like that, and then come to the other side, do the same thing. There's the other one there, a little harder to see because of that badge that's in the way, but it's the same deal. Just get in here, lift it up, move that out. Okay, so those bushings pushed back. Just grab the hood, pick it up, and just work it off of those guys. And there we go. Fuel pump is right behind here, as we know, because we can follow this fuel line in. We just need to remove this heat shield. There are 3 bolts. They're 1/2 inch, or you can also get away with using a 13 millimeter. There are those bolts, they're all the same, and then this just pulls off. It might get a little caught on that fuel line. There we go. We got 2 fuel lines to disconnect, this one here from the fuel tank and this one here that goes up to the carburetor. I just have a bag down here to try to catch some of that. And I do have a little line clamp I'm going to try to use, and I also have a plug. So we'll do this one first. I'll see if it works to line clamp it and then plug it, and then move my clamp over to the other one. We'll see. Alright, let's grab that and get in here and get on this. Pull that back. I did clean this up a little bit with a towel just to make sure I wasn't going to get anything in there. I have fairly recently replaced this fuel line, so it's probably not going to be too... Yeah, I think it was last year that I replaced this fuel line. There'll be a little bit of fuel in this part. And then probably a little fuel will drip from the pump. There we go. Now this one here, I don't think I have replaced this line yet, so I might replace it while I'm in here. Yeah, it looks like that might be pretty old. Let's see. Fuel might come out of there. There we go. Let's see. Yeah, I think that is the original line. With the hoses disconnected, we just have those two mounting bolts there. Those are both 12 millimeter. They're pretty long because they go through the fuel pump housing and through that plastic piece there, which is called an insulator. There's two gaskets, one on either side, and then they thread into the crankcase. I'm just going to clean up a little back here before we remove those bolts. Now we'll crack each one of these free before we remove either one all the way. There it is. Alright, now we'll back these out and get this pump off. So as you're pulling this out, if you push it, that push rod is going to cause the diaphragm to move, and it's going to push fuel out of here. Okay, almost. And there we are. Okay, there's our fuel pump. I was going to replace this insulator. Let me see. Yeah, I think I will. There's a gasket on that side, and then this gasket too. I'm going to go ahead and replace both of these gaskets and the insulator. You can see I've got this area cleaned up here. I took off the paper gasket, the insulator, and then the other paper gasket. And here are those parts, the new ones. I'll put up those part numbers and give a little bit more info on the bench in a second. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to replace, for example, this front gasket. If you get in here, you pull your fuel pump off and this looks good, I think you'd be alright just sticking a new fuel pump on and then reusing these. However, if you want to have them on hand, it's not a bad idea. They're only like $6-7 for all three of them. This is supposed to be a dry area. That's apparent now that I have this off. Now, it wasn't a dry area in this case because the diaphragm was leaking in the fuel pump, so the fuel was getting past the diaphragm, it was filling up the bottom, and then it was filling up this area, and that's not supposed to happen. So if you have that and these paper gaskets are all soaked with gasoline, then yeah, I would replace them. Or if somehow your insulator got cracked, yeah, I would replace that. Just pop them off, clean up the surface, and put new ones on like you'll see me do. But because I don't know how much fuel was filling up this area, and when you saw pulling the fuel pump back, you saw that fuel dumping out. I don't like the idea that fuel might have made it past this push rod, so if you want to inspect this push rod, you just pull it straight out. And that's how it looks. It doesn't have rounded edges, rounded ends like other push rods you'd see, for example, on valves. But this is run, I'll show you in a second on the bench, but it's run off the first lobe of the camshaft in there. And so fuel could have made it past here and gotten into the crankcase and mixed with the engine oil, and I don't like that idea. So I'm going to go ahead and do an engine oil change while I'm doing this repair, just because I don't like the idea of gasoline being mixed in with engine oil. So be sure to check that, especially if you get in here like you see in this video and gasoline's pouring out of this area when you pull the fuel pump back. That's a clue that you might have unfortunately been in a situation where gasoline might have made it in there. And gasoline doesn't belong in there. So here's our old fuel pump push rod. Don't be surprised that it doesn't have any rounded features on the end like other push rods you've probably seen working on engines. It's supposed to be like that. Nothing fell off or wore down, and we know that 'cause this is the new part. I ordered this to have one on hand. That's that part number there. And I'll put up the Kawasaki part as well, because I didn't know if this was going to be bent. Turns out it's not. I can reuse this. This was only like $6, so if you have reason to believe that you had some kind of catastrophic failure in your old fuel pump, or maybe this got jammed in some way, that this could have bent the push rod, then it might be a good idea to just have one on hand. I have here an old plastic camshaft Deere camshaft from an FD590V, just because it's kind of neat and I can show you. If you haven't replaced this part yet on your FD590V, you will one day, because the teeth will eventually shear off and then she won't start. So check out Terrell Fixes All YouTube channel for a really great video on that repair. But since I have one here, I might as well show. These are the cams for the different valves, and this is the cam for the fuel pump, and you can see not a whole lot of eccentricity on the lobe, but enough. And so it's a short stroke compared to see like the other side here, but it's just enough as this camshaft is turning to move this rod, and that rod is touching right there on that area. You can see a little spot it wore. And so if you had some kind of situation where this is jammed in some way, I suppose it could cause this to bend. There may be other conditions that might cause this to bend enough that it's beyond the recommended runout. All in all, I don't think it's necessary to have this part on hand when you do this job, unless you think you've got some type of catastrophic failure in here. Here is our old Kawasaki fuel pump. If you already got your fuel pump, I'll put up a timestamp. You can skip ahead to the install. But if you haven't got your fuel pump yet and you want to try to save some money on getting an actual Kawasaki part and not some aftermarket part, then I want to share with you some info that I learned in researching this. If you're just getting like a cheapo replacement on Amazon or eBay that's like a no-name Chinese $20 or $30 pump, then this doesn't really apply the discussion that I'm about to give. But if you want to get an actual Kawasaki pump, there's a couple ways you can possibly save. And what I mean is that this pump is used on a few different engines. I'll put those engines up, and it's used in quite a few different chassis. So what I learned in researching this is that when they did the redesign to add a place for the fuel redirect vent, so here it's just a hole to vent. On the new ones, because of the fire, there's a redirect and then you would attach a hose onto it. They made this, they used the same chassis, like fuel pump chassis meaning, and they just had a few different features that they put in here. So this here looks different from the actual John Deere one or Kawasaki one, which I'll put a picture up over here. I'll put that kit number and I'll put that price, because it's way more expensive than, for example, this one. Even though it's the same pump, this part is the only part that's different. And the way I found that out is I was actually looking at a parts diagram for an FD590V that's equipped in a Kubota, and I noticed that the fuel pump looked like exactly the same, but it had a different part number. I looked up the part number and it was this one. So there must be a feature on the chassis on that particular Kubota where they wanted to divert the hose this way, but it doesn't make a difference as far as the fuel pump. It's the exact same fuel pump. The only difference is that feature. So for example, because of that research, I was able to get this pump, which is a genuine made in Japan Kawasaki. It's got that mark on there. And this would be KHI, that's Kawasaki Heavy Industry or something like that, made in Japan. And this is the part number for this particular one. I got it new old stock, 49040-2083. And this was $45, something like that, new, as opposed to $95. Or like with the kit. The kit is like $120 all the way up to like $160. The kit is kind of a scam in my opinion, because all you're getting for the kit is a little short stretch of hose and a hose clamp. So you can go to the auto parts store and buy a hose clamp and a little short stretch of hose for like $1 or $2. So you don't need to buy the kit. You can buy the pump, and I will put up, as far as I know, the part number for the one that comes in the kit. That kit that's ending in I think it's 2164, that has the straight fitting here. It's the same part number except ends in instead of 8.3, it ends in 8.2. And that you might be able to get for cheaper, you know, let's say $60 or $70 instead of $120. And then you can just, you know, use your own hose clamp or get a Whitaker clamp or go get a little hose clamp at the auto parts store, a little stretcher hose, whatever. So when in my particular case, like I said, I got this one because it's the same pump. It was just a lot cheaper. And when I mock this up, if I don't like the way that this would route a hose, if there's not a place like I could zip tie it or whatever, I'll just cut this and I'll turn this into a straight one, put a little clamp on there and be done with it. So I wanted to mention that because there's a few different ways to get around paying the hefty price. Hopefully this info helps you to save some money on it, and you'll see why, now you know why my pump looks a little bit different than some of the others you might see on the YouTube videos. As for the gaskets, here are the part numbers. I did get these through John Deere. They were only like $1 something each for the paper ones, and I think the insulator, which I believe is that part there, was like $3 something. So it was like $6 for all these parts. You'll need 2 of the paper ones if you're replacing these, and 1 of the insulator, or again, you may choose to just reuse your insulator if it's in good condition. And as for the new pump, I did put it in place and decide to cut that, so I just used a hacksaw to cut that. And I got hose that fits real well on there. You don't have to use a reinforced fuel line hose on this since it's just a vent. You'll see on the kit as well that they're just using a regular unreinforced hose. That's a real snug fit I managed to get on there, so I don't even think I need a hose clamp. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall this. Paper, insulator, paper, and I got the 2 bolts ran through there just to make it a little easier to get this into place. If you took your push rod out, make sure you got that push rod back in place. And grab your 12mm socket ready, and we'll sneak back in here and get this going. You'll get a little resistance from the push rod as you're fastening it in. Just go back and forth on the bolts, a little bit at a time on each one, until you get it snug, and then we will torque this down. Torque for these 2 bolts is 150 inch-pounds or 17 Newton-meters. If you're not using a torque wrench, you just don't need to have them in there crazy tight. And there it is. And there it is. Now we'll get our fuel lines. Carburetor line is on the output side here. Input side is that line from the fuel tank. There's my hose clamp there. Make sure you got your hose clamp on that if you took that off. I'll slide this on here. Make sure you get the hose clamp past that feature at the end of the fitting so that you're on there real well. Looks good. Alright, and if you undid that side on the top, obviously do that, and we will get our other fuel line connected. And this line tucked in here behind the choke cable. I'm going to move quick so I don't leak any fuel. Alright, there we go. Might have to pull that clamp back a tad. Let's see. Nope, I'm up to there. See that fitting, or that feature there on the fitting. You know you got the hose in far enough. Move that right like so. Give it a good tug. Okay. Alright. Now for routing this hose, there's a hole in the chassis here, and there's one over here. I think I'm actually just going to go over here. There it is, coming out underneath. It's not by anything hot. It's not in the way of any kind of pulley or anything that's going to be moving and possibly getting snagged on it. So I think I'm good there. I might just cut a couple inches off of it. So wherever you decide to route this hose, just make sure that it's not going to come in contact with either the exhaust pipes or the muffler. Now remember, we have this shield here, and that's going to keep it away from the muffler unless for some reason you don't have a shield. You do want to run with that heat shield in, because this muffler gets hot. But just make sure you've got it in an area where if this diaphragm leaks in the future, the fuel is going to drip down and away. I undid these zip ties here and there to give myself a little bit more room. So if you did that as well, make sure you replace those. There are those two zip ties back in place. Now we just have the heat shield and the hood and we're good to go. Before I do that, before I put the heat shield on, I'm going to go ahead and start her up and check for leaks at any of these connections and make sure that I'm not getting a leak at the diaphragm on my brand new pump. Hopefully not. So we'll hook this battery back up, negative side, 1/2 inch, nice and snug. So we'll go ahead and start her up. I got the safety switch overridden on the seat, and let's see what we get. So it looks good. No leaks here at the fuel lines. No leak coming out of that overflow either. So we are all set. Now, if your Kawasaki twin did not start up as well as this one did, check the pinned comment for a link to another video. I just replaced the coils and the spark plug caps on both cylinders. And man, did that ever make a difference in performance and in startup. So I changed my mind, and even though this hose is really tight, I am going to go ahead and put a little clamp on here. So I found that this, the smallest size of the Oitikers from Harbor Freight, I mean, they're not real Oitikers, but they're ear clamps. That'll fit on there real nice. And of course, if you like ear clamps, these are the best, in my opinion, ear clamp pliers, these Knipex. So I'm going to get that pretty close up there because that is pretty short. Just get that on there nice and snug. That'll do it. Now the heat shield, don't run without this heat shield. I had to clean mine up because it had some gasoline on the inside from where it was spraying on there and leaking. These features here on the heat shield are intended to prevent things from hitting those hot exhaust pipes. So like this in particular, this is a coolant hose. It needs to be on the inside. So when you're putting this in, you need to make sure that don't touch anything that's hot if your engine's hot, or your muffler's hot I should say, but it's got to catch like that. So keep that in mind as you're putting this on. I'll just put this back in place here, being careful not to touch anything that's hot. Work it back into place. Alright, and then those fasteners were these three. Those were the 1/2 inch. Or you'll probably get away with a 13 millimeter. This hose here is the one I was talking about. You want to make sure that's on the inside of the shield there, because that is a coolant hose and you don't want it to possibly touch that hot exhaust pipe. Now the hood, remember those two spots on the hood, those bushings that fit here and here? When I put it on, I'm just going to eyeball that there, and I have found it's actually easier to position them from the front. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Let me grab this hood. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of lift it up a little bit and push that into place there. There it is. And now look back on the other side, make sure you didn't knock the other one off in the process of doing that one. And I didn't, I got both of them in. That one is in, and this one over here is in. So now we'll tip the hood open and then put these back in place. And there are those two cotter keys back in place. Then on this side we've got the headlight plug. Snap, snap. And that is it. I'm interested to see what's inside this old fuel pump, so I made a bunch of cuts around here with the hacksaw, and I'm going to try to pry this cover off so we can pop it open and have a look inside. I got these peeled back, so I can pull this off now, see what's under here. Oh yeah, you can see. That's what was leaking, that diaphragm. Just got old and started leaking. So fuel was making it past This top part, the fuel's supposed to stay up here. I was getting into this diaphragm. I'll take this apart in a second. Let me put that to the side and see what we have here. Might have to peel back that a little bit. Those bits of metal in there were from me cutting it. That was not in the fuel pump itself. Now I can pull this out, and this is our top part here. So let's put this back together on the bench. So here's our old fuel pump ready for inspection. This top part is steel, this bottom part is aluminum. But it's pretty cool to do this because I'll take it apart. Alright, I'll show you the part that failed, which is the diaphragm. You can see it just got old, wore out. Probably the original. 1989, man, how old's that? Pretty old. And fuel is supposed to stay on this side. So underneath here, I'll try to get this apart, but there's a spring there. And so this actuating lever where the push rod presses, I'll just simulate that with my finger, and you can see how the diaphragm will move up and down. So the return is by the spring, and the movement down is by the push rod pushing it. Push rod lets go, the spring pushes back. If we take a closer look at this top chamber here, remember this is our inlet from the gas tank. This is our outlet to the carburetor, and that's our inlet valve. This is our outlet valve. So when we pop this out, we can see that this gasket separates that inlet fitting, separates flow there, so that when that diaphragm moves down, it pulls fuel in past this valve. This valve here, it is a valve, it's not a plug. You can see it's just like this one, it's just other side. And then when the diaphragm moves up, it pushes the fuel through here. That fills up this chamber, and since that's sealed off with this gasket, the fuel is pushed out here to the carburetor. So this could fail here, this seal could fail here, you could get a failure at these valves, but in my case it was the diaphragm. So I'm going to try to take this apart here because I'm curious. Since this is an aluminum housing, I'm thinking I could snip. Took a little bit of effort, but I was able to break off a couple of pieces of this aluminum so that I can pull this out now. You can see how they installed this, and then they just deformed, they pressed that aluminum in there to keep that rod in place. So this is how this goes. That comes out right like that. And this is a yoke, as you can see. And then there's the actuator for the spring that yoke lever is moving up and down. Now we can pull this out. And there's our diaphragm with our spring. And if we look in here, there's our weep hole. That's where the gasoline was coming out. That's the problem, because the diaphragm, that old diaphragm, wore out. And so again, this was leaking enough, obviously, for fuel to come out there, but also to fill up this area and the area between the insulator and the engine, because you saw when I was removing this fuel pump that gasoline was just pouring out from this area, that area that's supposed to be a dry area. So again, if you're replacing your fuel pump for the same reason that I am here with this faulty diaphragm, and especially if you don't know how long it's been leaking, or if your engine oil smells extra gasoline-y or even seems somehow high when you haven't added engine oil, double check that you didn't get some gasoline into the engine oil, because you want to take care of that. You don't want to be running with gasoline mixed in with the engine oil. So now to put this back together, this would just go in here like this, push it down so I can see that there, and oh, I gotta put this little rod in there, slide that in there to catch that, and that's it. So there's our fuel pump. Pretty hard to believe that something like this is $160. I did change the oil in the filter, and the oil looked good, smelled good, didn't seem like there was any excessive fuel in the oil, so I don't think that was leaking for very long. Check the channel if you'd like a video for that. And the other thing I did was I went ahead and installed a fire extinguisher here. I am just not about that kind of drama. So this is one of those typical fire extinguishers that just comes with a bracket, and I mounted it on here so I can still get in there. All I ever keep in there is an extra safety switch and a jumper for the switch. So I just drilled a few holes in a recycled strong tie back there, and I've got 2 rivets here. Wanted to do rivets all the way because of vibration, but couldn't get my rivet gun in there, so that one's got a nut and bolt on there, but hopefully I'll never have to use it, but it's in here now in case I do. So I hope this video was helpful for you with your John Deere 285, 345, 725, or any of the other models that might have this V-twin Kawasaki with that fuel pump. Thank you for watching and good luck with your repair.